Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project, where we're creating the blueprint to help you become the best human you can be so you can give your gifts back to the world. I'm your guide and fellow optimizer, Christopher Camp. In a world of ever-increasing pressure and growing demands, our stress levels just continue to climb and climb and climb. When it seems like everyone is spinning out of control, having the ability to appropriately manage our stress can be a real superpower. In order to continue to be high performers, we must develop appropriate ways for viewing, understanding, managing, and eventually overcoming stress. Accordingly, the title of our session today is How to Manage Your Stress, Name It, Control It, and Use It for Good. Our expert joining us today is a dear friend that has dedicated himself to helping others with this very problem. Dr. Peter Ree is an orthopedic hand surgeon and professor at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. As a former active duty and current reserve surgeon for the United States Air Force, Dr. Ree has a breadth of experience and knowledge in treating life-altering injuries and managing stressful situations. He is the Assistant Dean for Trainee Well-Being for the Mayo Clinic School of Graduate Medical Education and is a certified stress management and resiliency trainer. He is a joy and well-being champion and has a passion for education and mentorship. He's an avid outdoorsman and has a passion for hunting and fishing as well. His wife, Laura, is a palliative care and hospice physician, and they're both crazy busy raising their 4 amazing children. Well, Peter, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Good. So we'll try to stay organized. I've got things broken down into 3 sections like we always do, and each one's going to be themed with one big question. So our first section, our first big question is, what exactly is stress and how does it show up in our lives? The second big question, why do so many of us feel overwhelmed and what are the consequences? I think that one's going to speak to everybody. And then our third one, we'll get into some solutions in the last section. What are the practical steps we can take to reduce and control our stress levels? So those sound like simple questions, but I don't think the answers are going to be that simple. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, hopefully I can give you some answers, at least some direction on how to manage stress.
All right, sounds perfect. So let's dive in. So in our first section, we're going to talk about what stress is and how it shows up in our lives. But I think for our audience, it might be helpful for them to hear a little bit about your life and kind of tell us, you're an orthopedic surgeon who sort of dedicated himself to stress management and resiliency training. How did you come to be in this role, in this position, and develop this passion?
I think that a lot of physicians in general, we didn't get good training in stress and how it impacted our personal lives and how it translated to good patient care, safe patient care. And as surgeons, we're not the best at communicating our feelings. And it was something that I think in the past, we didn't talk about stress as a surgeon. If you were a trainee, for instance, you wouldn't ask your attending a decade ago, I'm a little stressed. What do you do to manage stress? And so it was always something that was looming there and was affecting us, but we just didn't talk about it. And I really look back and think that I was very resilient, had good abilities to cope with stress. I prided myself on that, but despite that, even me who felt like I had good tactics, I found myself in the lowest point of my life, not just my career, my life. And that really made me think about how do I change my life, my practice, but also gave me awareness that if it could happen to me, I feel like I'm an optimist and find joy in a lot of things. If it could happen to me, it could happen to anyone. So it became a little bit of my passion and my purpose to educate and find ways to help individuals.
Mm-hmm. And would you say the same is true in the military? You've got a long experience in the military. I think that in the past, it was probably harder to have these discussions in the military, but that seems to be more of an emphasis and focus now.
Absolutely. Actually, there's more veterans that die from suicide than from any combat casualty. So I think that in the past, also in the military, we didn't think about that. But now the military has one of the most robust programs to manage stress and to be aware that stress can lead to a lot of detrimental things in your lives.
Mm-hmm. And for our audience too, I've known Peter for a long time, maybe 15 years or so since we started residency here. And I would always put you on my list of like the top 5 most upbeat, happy, optimistic people I know. That's just been your general disposition. So I remember when you first started talking to me about you were going through this and really struggling, I thought, What? This is Superman here. This is like Superman optimist. What's going on? And so that really was a wake up call to me to say, yeah, if this can happen to you, this can happen to me and anybody else. And so I know that was a big turning point for you, and it was a huge wake up call for me personally as well. So just wanted to tell you, your story has sort of affected me in a lot of ways, and has really motivated me.
Good.
All right. So let's get started. First, I want to hear, how do you define stress?
So I think stress is really just your physiologic response to a stressor. And I remember in college, one of my coaches in football said, stress is just how you perceive it. And I remember always thinking about that, but I now recognize that is true because stressors will always be there. There's physical stressors like it's cold outside, I'm not wearing a winter coat, or I'm working really hard right now and fatigued. So there's physical stressors, but there's definitely emotional stressors. So the stressors are there, and then it's our internal state of how we are and how we can manage that stressor that manifests in some sort of physiologic response. And that response could be changes in heart rate. It can then lead to emotional changes, to anxiety, depression, things like that. But I think at its core, stress is really this lack of balance between the stressors and then your internal state on how you can manage those things.
Mm-hmm. Your initial definition I really like. So what I wrote down is the body's physiologic response to demand or change or external stimuli. If you look at that definition in and of itself, it's sort of morally neutral. That's not necessarily good or bad. It's just your body's response to change. But I think we always think of stress as negative. So I want to ask you, is all stress bad for us?
No, actually, if those listening can take a couple of key points, I think the most important thing about stress is it is a natural physiologic response. It is hardwired into us from primitive times where you always had to worry about things. And if a stressor presented itself, it was a mechanism to survive. And through the years, it's not so much that we're seeing saber-toothed tigers or things on the street, but those stressors are still real and they still evoke some sort of physiologic response. And so the stress response, which we may get to later, that's a natural mechanism for us. So everyone will deal with it. And this acute stress response is actually quite helpful. It can actually engage a portion of your autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic system, which actually is good for these states where a stressor causes you to be more focused. It changes your body's physiology to help prepare yourself for a physical stressor. So I think that in itself is good. It can even be anti-inflammatory. It can help against disease or infection resistance. So it's good. It's just in the long term, it can be detrimental.
Yeah, I love that. That's so good. And so you're saying stress is natural and it's normal, because I think one of the things that we do is that we get stressed and then we recognize that, and then we feel bad for being stressed, or we feel like something's wrong with us because we're stressed, which then stresses us out more. And we get stuck in this sort of negative spiral. We start circling the drain. So that's a great call out, for our audience. It's like, stress is normal. It's going to happen. If it does, don't beat yourself up first. So the next step is, if you can admit it's natural, it's sort of saying, okay, good stress, bad stress. How do we distinguish between the two?
Yeah, I think that in the acute phase, the stress response that you may experience from whether it's interpersonal tension, it could be just a lot of work that you need to manage, but you just don't have the time to. Whatever the stress is, the stress response can be very beneficial to you. I think of it as, for some reason, if I have something due, like in a month, I'm not focused, I think I'm just going to keep pushing it off. And I jokingly say, I need that sense of urgency to let me tackle that. Right?
I call that strategic procrastination.
I love it.
I use that sometimes. I know, like, if I put myself under a deadline, slight deadline, not too much, but just enough to squeeze me just the right amount, that I am more focused and more efficient.
That's exactly right. I think you just have to recognize that that is okay. And actually, in the right balance, it actually helps you perform a little bit bit better. I think where stress becomes negative, whether it's acute stress or chronic stress, is when it actually has a negative toll on your well-being. And that could be physically, whether it's poor nutrition, poor sleep, or it affects you professionally in your work life, your interactions, relationships with others, poor work performance. I think that's when you have to take a pause and say, how can I manage my stress a little bit better? Because now the good effects of stress are now starting to become negative.
So I'm kind of writing a list here. So I've got two columns, good stress, bad stress, the qualities of both. And so on the good stress, you're saying oftentimes that gets you started. It will stimulate you. It motivates you. It helps to focus you. It maybe even inspires you, makes you more productive. Those are some qualities of good stressors. Bad stressors are often chronic. It'll decrease well-being. It'll decrease how you feel physically, your physical health, affect your sleep, decrease your joy, and decrease your performance.
Yes, and if I could just add to that, the negative part of stress, I would think of the stress response being physiologic, and so it has these changes on you. Eventually, it impacts your emotions. I want to separate emotions from the stress response, because you may get to that point where you're emotionally not in a healthy place, but the stress part is physiologic. It's then with time, how does that then make you have anhedonia, so lack of joy, or does it make you anxious or depressed, things like that?
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So we got to separate sort of the physical component of it from the emotional or mental, which is great. Okay, so that's a great way of sort of separating kind of the good and bad stresses. Can we talk a little bit about time management and stress? Because I do think it feels like we use this phrase on almost every episode of the Human Optimization Project, time scarcity. And we all like to think, well, if I just had more time, I could fix all these problems in my life. That's probably not true. But how does time scarcity influence stress management?
I think that just sets you up. So if you put on too much on your plate and you don't have enough time, which we're limited by time, right? Because as part of just optimizing the human performance, sleep is so integral. So let's say you carve out time for sleep that you need to be healthy, and then you have your work responsibilities. All that extra time, it's finite. And so I think that we may get into here in a little bit on how you can manage stress in a lot of different ways, but that definitely is a stressor when you've put on too much onto yourself, even if it's things that you want to do, you like to do, but if you just overburden yourself and you can't, physically you can't get it all done to the degree that you want to excel in that delivery, you're going to be stressed. I think about it as when my wife works on the weekend. And I have 4 kids. And if I plan a lot of things that I'm going to get done, I am incredibly stressed the entire weekend with my kids when I should be enjoying that time with them. But the shift has come where I don't plan anything, right? Other than just being a good father and just being mindful and present. If I do that, and there is that moment where everyone's quiet, there's no disaster, I have like 30 minutes, I'm gonna actually take care of a couple of things, I'm not stressed because whatever challenges that come throughout the day from the kids or my interactions with them, it doesn't negatively impact me. Even though the facts are there, I have this much I need to do, I have limited time. So I think a little bit then goes into how you get into the right mindset of how you're gonna approach things in a limited amount of time. But probably really it goes to also you weeding down or trimming down to the things that you need to do, that you want to do, that part of your purpose.
Bingo. I love that. You're really, there's 2 main concepts that I'm pulling out of that. Number one is intentionality. Define what it is you want to do with your time. And then all of a sudden you're prioritizing and you're focusing a little bit better. But the second though, is you also talked about how this really does impact other areas of our life too. And so if you're excessively stressed, then you're going to sleep less, and then your nutrition is off, then your physical health is off, which then makes you stress more. And so you get stuck in these sort of negative doom loops, and which can really start to take away your joy and instill your enthusiasm for life. So if you can make some small improvements in each of those, you can reverse the sequence of that loop and start getting some positive synergy. I
agree.
And I love the analogy with the kids. The audience knows I have 4 kids as well, and I try to do the same thing. It's hard doing both, saying, well, I'm going to get a lot of work done and I'm going to spend quality time with my kids. And sometimes You can't just say, all right, I have nothing else to do. I'm going to forget all the hard stuff. I'm just going to play with the kids all day today. And so sometimes I was setting out the intentionality. This past weekend, we had some stuff that we had to do around the house. And I told the kids, I was like, all right, I want your help. Let's all do it together. Some of them are more helpful than the others, but I said, we're all going to work together on this and we're going to crush it. We're going to make this fun. We're going to get this done. And we got it. And then I said, when we get it done, then we're going to go play putt-putt golf and have ice cream. And that's what we did. And the kids got, at the end of the day, were like, this was a great day. We made some forward progress. We had some fun. We had some ice cream. It was a great day.
I think our parenting styles are the same because my fundamental parenting tactic is bribery. So we're going to do this and then we're going to go get ice cream.
That's right.
And my wife comes home and says, how'd you get so much done?
Work hard, play hard. Work hard, play hard.
That's right.
I love it. One of my daughters actually said to me this weekend, I told her I had an off day, so we're going to get some stuff done. She said, why is it that every time you have an off day, we have a work day? I said, well, it's just a half work day. We're going to have some fun at the end of it as well.
Yeah.
All right. So now let's get into our second section on why so many of us feel overwhelmed and what the consequences are of that. So stress management feels like a huge issue. How big of an issue is this for us as a society?
It's a tremendous impact and burden on the society. There's been multiple surveys that are national or global. There was a Gallup study in the early 2020s, and basically 41% of 122 countries, if I recall, said that the population said that they were incredibly stressed. And taking it further, there's other studies that show that almost 80% of parents say that being a parent is extremely stressful. And
the other 20% are just lying, then, I think. Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely true. And so the burden of stress impacts everyone because, again, to live, you're going to have stressors. They're always there. And if you don't have the right balance in how you can manage the stress, you're going to feel that somehow because that's hardwired into our physiology.
And I think all of these things really correlate with burnout. Long term. We did an episode earlier with Colin West that talked about burnout and how this chronic feeling of stress. And as you've highlighted, some of this comes from work, some of this comes from home life, and everywhere in between too. And it's all additive and it all affects these different areas. So we started to talk about this a little bit, but I want to get into more detail. What are some of the most common sources of stress in our lives? Work is obviously a big one, but it's certainly not the only one.
Right. If you ask the general population, the number one stressor is money. It's finances. It certainly is, and everything that goes around it, right? It's the right job to get enough income, and then the quality of life and the expenditures that go into living and having the life that you want. There's always going to be some challenges there. So that's the number one stressor. But if you look into healthcare providers or someone in healthcare, and probably would translate to anyone in the workforce, it's lack of autonomy. That is the number one stressor, which then contributes to burnout. Like you said, a burnout by definition is the psychological syndrome, a collection of symptoms that you experience from chronic interpersonal stressors at work. Right. And so one of the biggest things is lack of autonomy. And then in the healthcare profession, the electronic medical records certainly is a high contributor of stress, just because it adds more to your workday and your workload that is not seemingly truly patient care.
Kind of depersonalization too.
Yeah, absolutely,
think,
which is a tenet of burnout too,
Right.
is a depersonalization.
Yeah. That's so true. And I think that those things exist for all of us in different flavors and variations and different versions. And I think that it's getting harder in our world now where we're 24/7 connected with constant, alerts and notifications and messaging. How do you think that impacts us?
It impacts us tremendously. I'll give you an example. I do not read the news regularly, which is probably not the right thing to do in today's economics and landscape. But my wife will read on her phone before we go to bed, and she'll just read the news. And often she'll say, "Gosh, it's just depressing," and I'm just gullibly not even acknowledging all the different sad stories around the world, because that would stress me out as well. And it puts me in a state already going into bed, not in a positive mood. And so I think just news in general, now with social media, which has so much of an algorithm to deliver content to you that certainly in terms of news, it's not always a biased perspective either. It's somewhat in a way made to evoke an emotion, right? A strong emotion one way or the other. And so that can definitely add to your stress because it's giving you a perspective of our world that may not be true. And that's also with social media as well. It's this illusion of a life that is just highly edited that we see, and it makes you feel like you're not achieving success. And so that, I think all of that adds to your stress for sure, because you constantly get these stressors. And then also, if you are constantly getting like messages, like actually one of the best things that I did was to not get work emails on my phone, because I constantly found myself looking at my email. And it didn't change whether I answered it then or at night when the kids were asleep, but it just made me feel like I had to be connected. But then it would keep me away from being in the present.
Mm-hmm. I do think that it's critical for us to find the way to disconnect however we can. And we talked about, we sat down with Justin Anderson previously, we talked about cognitive overload and all of the constant sort of pings and notifications and badges and banners and all this stuff that constantly, all of that is just, it's adding stress and stress and stress and stress. And those little bitty things add up to be huge. And so I do encourage people to find ways to get that under control. Compartmentalize that, time block your calendar so you have dedicated time to take care of that and take control over it again. I love the point you brought up about the news, seeming so negative. And it's funny that we as individuals usually don't want to take responsibility for this. We want to blame the media and the outlets. Oh, they're so negative. They're so negative. But in reality, it's a human being problem. It's not an individual problem. It's not just a society problem. It's not just a news media outlet problem. We all have this strong negativity bias. Like we're wired to look out for threats, and that's what sells, and that's what people read, and that's what they do. So I think we have to keep that lens in mind when we are reading or watching the news, that it is going to lean towards the negativity. Unfortunately, there's a lot of great things happening out there in the world that we just aren't aware of because it doesn't get the notoriety that it should. And in reality, if you look at all different metrics of human progress and civilizations, like we're actually getting better. Overall, there is reason for hope and there is optimism. Our numbers of wars and violent deaths are down. The people dying from infectious diseases that are now can be controlled is dramatically down, and the number of people dying from starvation is down. So there is cause for hope. It just doesn't always get the headline news. So if you do read the news and you focus on this, just be sure to balance it out. Know that there's some stuff out there that's good that you're not hearing about. I think it'd be really helpful. So what are some of the consequences of this sort of focus on the things that can be overwhelming and kind of the chronic stress? We all feel it. We know that it doesn't feel good, but what are some of the other ways that it impacts us? And I think about it does more than just affect how we feel emotionally, but I think it has impacts on our body, our mood, behavior, relationships, performance. Let's go through some of those.
Yeah, I think since I said that stress is really your physiologic response, I think there's the impact. So if we think about just physiology and just wellness in general, which is your body's like health, not necessarily mind and spiritual, emotional health, but like body's health, like it definitely can impact you. So sleep, we know, is very important. So if that affects your sleep, then there's a lot of things that during our sleep, it's one of the most neuroprotective things that we can do for a body. A lot of literature shows that your lack of sleep could lead to dementia. That's a time for, even in kids, the stressors on kids are so high that if their sleep is disrupted, that's like the perfect time for growth hormones for development and growth. And so you can have an impact not only on like your energy level, which then, like you mentioned earlier, it will have a spiral to a ripple effect, if you will, on other parts of your life. So I think that performance then will also be affected too. I just think about, if you're a trainee, let's say, and you are stressed because of the rotation that you're on, whether it's the interpersonal stressors between you and your attending. Let's say there's not good communication. You always don't feel like you're adding up. And you, on top of that, add perfectionism, imposter syndrome, all these things that you are already in a poor state. Now you're getting poor sleep, and now you're expected to do a surgery in a high stress environment versus someone that has a different, that is well rested, great relationships, feels supported. Like, you will definitely see a difference in performance and what you retain from that performance, not just going through the motions.
And then you're setting yourself up too for like physical illness and sickness.
Absolutely.
And GI upset and irritation. Like, all of these things are linked to stress. And so each of these is going to decrease your performance substantially.
Exactly. Actually, if I could go further on that, the stress response is all through the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, right? And those are connected to every part of your body. Right. And so if your stress response affects your sympathetic, parasympathetic chain, I mean, then that's when you get GI upset, you get high blood pressure, tachycardia. Like, everything is connected to the body. Your mind is connected to your body. So if your mind is already in a poor state, it can only have a spillover effect into your body somehow.
Which is then going to increase irritability, anxiety, you lose motivation. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the other thing is where I think a lot of people that don't think about this as a true physiologic problem, it's a neurophysiologic problem that's hardwiredness. It's normal. But if you recognize you have stress, or you're in a stressful environment and you're starting to feel the anxiety and the high heart rate, and you get jittery, what will not work is you trying to reason with your brain, saying, this is stressful, I just got to get over it, because that in itself is often not enough. You can't reason someone that has mental health challenges. I'm not saying that you have like a true diagnosable access disorder, but if you are feeling the effects of physiology from a normal stress response, it's really hard for you to reason yourself to get calm again.
And one of the things too that is the most impactful on our joy is having meaningful, genuine relationships with other people. How does having this chronic stress that's out of control impact our relationships with others?
I think it affects your relationships tremendously, because if you're not in a good state and you don't, you're just in extremis and damage control, if you will, you're just trying to preserve yourself, then that is going to take away from all of your meaningful relationships somehow. I'll give you an example. I remember when my son was much younger, maybe 8 or so, and I was in this phase where I was experiencing so much stress, but I didn't really know what it was. But I was not present. I was there, and he asked me a question that was very important to him. And in all the things that I was thinking about and stressed about, he said, "Hey, Dad." And I said, "What?" And already in an 8-year-old mind, he could sense that. And he said, "Never mind." I said, "What? No, what is it? I mean, you already have my attention. Like, what is it?" And he said, "Never mind. You seem pretty stressed." And that was one of the most eye-opening moments for me. When an 8-year-old and, at the time, 8-year-old, 6-year-old, 4-year-old in the car went quiet because they knew Dad was stressed.
You mentioned just a minute ago too, like how it's hard for us to see it in ourselves and rationalize our way through it. And here you're showing like the 8-year-old was better able to pick up on it than you were yourself.
Exactly. And for a period of time, the kids would actually preface coming to me by saying, "Are you stressed? Like, you seem stressed." And I'm like, "No, I'm actually not stressed. Like, why would you think that? Well, I just by the way, like, your tone." And like, gosh, like, if kids are that perceptive, like, think about then the unconscious relationship you have with your coworkers, right? Like, if you and I are coming to talk about something and already I have that demeanor, like, if you have any baseline emotional intelligence, you would already sense that as a threat, right? And then that changes the dynamic when it's really a me problem that I may not even think that I'm projecting onto you.
It's interesting. I'm thinking about stress in contrast to some of the other qualities we've talked about. So we here on sort of on the positive side, we have some episodes dedicated to gratitude, resilience, optimism. Those are 3 of the qualities that it's interesting that if you have more of those in your life, they really improve every aspect of your life. Relationships, productivity, joy, meaning, fulfillment, achievement, everything. Chronic stress is almost the opposite, right? It's sort of when you have excessive stress or uncontrolled stress, it takes away from all of those areas as well. So this is something that is stealing from us in really every category of performance. And so if we can start to get a little better handle on that, I think that could be helpful.
I think it's just awareness. I think awareness that it is a natural response, but there are tactics that we can utilize to use distress for good. And then also when you're in this acute stress response, to find ways that you can blunt that effect. And then on the back end, it's to raise your resilience to stress, which is a part of changing your stress ceiling or threshold so that can modify. Because some people, that's very low, some are very high, but then also the slope in which the stressors can actually reach that, you can modify that too. So there's on two ends, the acute side and then the subacute chronic side, there are tactics that we can use.
Perfect. Well, let's get into those. So let's transition to this third section and we'll start talking about some solutions. And as we do, one thing I want to mention, you talked earlier about sort of social media and these external pressures, is that I think that oftentimes we outsource our definition of success and happiness, and that we look at the world and see what other people are doing or what we think they're doing based on their social media profiles or how they put themselves together on TV and think, oh, that's what I should be doing, so I'm going to do that as well. So you're sort of adopting somebody else's definition of success and trying to apply it to your life, which is not going to fit. Like, you're setting yourself up for stress and failure in doing that. So I would encourage our audience, in this process, one of the things you have to do is first start and define what does success look like for you? What are you trying to achieve? What are your goals? What are your values? What's your purpose? What's your mission? We talk about that a lot on here, but I really think that's critical. And so I want the audience to keep that in mind as we start to transition in here and we start talking about some real solutions. So is this something that we can actually get better at? Or is this something for, certain people just seem to be born more towards stress, some more towards relaxation and optimism. But can we actually improve it if we try?
Yes. So I think that there's the one part of managing stress. So if we think about stress management and also resiliency, which I think are two different ends of the spectrum, stress management would be more, in my opinion, would be in the acute stressful period. How do you manage that? And then how do you rebound? And then stress resiliency is more of the back end of how can we get our perspective and our lives in a way that the stressors are not impacting us as much. So the example would be like you said, the individual who always seems just frantic, frenetic for minimal stressors, as opposed to someone else that is doing so much on their plate that you say, I don't know how they do it, but they are collected and they're getting through it okay. At least on the surface, it seems that way. And so for the acute stress response, I think about it a lot in the perspective of a trainee, because in surgery, a lot of times our trainees suffer from, I mentioned earlier, imposter syndrome and perfectionism. Those two things set them up for failure. So that's somewhat analogous to social media, right? Because in someone's mind, they say, this is what success should be, and this is how I should perform, let's say in surgery. It should be flawless. If you have that mindset, you're always going to fail, right? Because it's you can never really be perfect in anything. And so let's say you're asking, since I'm a hand microvascular surgeon, let's say there's a trainee who already is nervous about doing micro. So doing microsurgery, fixing a tube or a vessel that's a submillimeter, where every minor movement under the microscope is amplified, right? And so if you notice, let's say, a tremor, that makes it worse. Your heart starts racing. And so in that moment where you just have to manage that stress, there is a way that you can tap into the physiology. So since the stress response is physiologic, so processed through the amygdala, the fear center, and it sends this cascade through the HPA axis, which then eventually ends up your adrenals that releases adrenaline and cortisol. So it gets you to a point that you're focused, yes, mobilizes fuel for the fight, if you will. but it has a lot of negative effects too. And so the way you can manage that, the best hardwire way is to work on your breathing. And there's been a lot of focus on breathing, but if you think about the science behind it, because I'm a little bit of a pessimist too, in the sense that unless there's hard science behind it, I don't believe it.
You're a skeptical optimist.
Yeah, that's probably a better way. Skeptical optimist, right? Not really pessimistic, I guess. And so if you think about when you focus on the portion of your breathing that is exhalation. So when you exhale, what you're doing is generating a lot of pressure inside your lungs, right? And so at the top of your inhalation, your volume of air in your lungs in your thoracic cavity is so high, your heart can't fill up as much, right? So if it can't fill up as much, then the blood that is traveling through your heart and through the ventricles atrium are going faster because it's less area, so it needs to move faster. Your sinoatrial node will sense that, I guess, speed or velocity of blood, and then it will say, we need to calm your heart rate down. So in what's called the exhalation focused breathing, you can use that, and it takes just 5 of those breaths to, within minutes, change your heart rate. And what practically that looks like is focusing more on the exhalation phase. So not just a longer duration. So let's say you breathe in for 6 seconds, hold for 2, breathe out for 7, but it's almost breathing with a pursed lip. So you can increase that pressure inside your lungs so your heart can't fill up as much. And so it would be more like that type of breathing. And just 5 of those will change your heart rate almost immediately.
So you are sort of interrupting that physiologic response, which is great because that's something that is completely under your control. The breathing part is like the one thing you can control in this environment, right? You can't necessarily control the external circumstances that got you here, but you can control your response to it with the breathing.
Exactly, because your stress response is all physiologic. So you're using physiology to bring that down. And then there's other parts of your breathing as well, because if you then just focus on your breathing in and out, not so much that you're meditating in that moment, but even if you're like in surgery, let's say, or you're in a stressful situation and you're doing that breathing and you're trying to not make it so obvious, right? Because people will then say like, what are you doing? But let's say you're doing that breathing and you just focus on just the breath, because otherwise your mind is clouded with every thought, oh my gosh, like now they're going to say I'm even more of an imposter. I'm not perfecting on this. And so then you just focus on the breathing and in and out, and whatever thoughts are there, you can just let those just go by. So then you're just focusing on the breathing. So that, in a way, is you're still using your breathing. It could be a metronome, just something that's regular that makes you just cone everything out, filter everything out, and now you're just focused on your breathing. That can help too.
Great. And so it is going to help you from a physiologic standpoint, also mentally, because now you have something new you're focused on that's much more simple, hopefully distracting. Great. What are some other strategies either to help with the physiologic response or the emotional response?
And I think now I go into the resiliency phase of things. And so that's the acute response to stress that you can use. It's very practical. I think anyone can apply it. Now, on the stress resiliency standpoint, I think that's where you can then tap into the things that you talked about. And I think a couple of really key areas or domains that will help in your resiliency. And by resiliency, I mean either raising your stress threshold or the stressors just don't come up to that slope as quickly. It's a slower or a lower slope, are things such as mindfulness, kindness, and gratitude. And I think you touched on a lot of those things, and I think they help in a lot of different ways. And I can certainly go into those if you like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about those collectively. And I think this is something where people often think, well, listen, if I'm stressed, my heart's going out of control, it's like it's really hard for me to be grateful in that moment. And that's why I think a lot of where I think you're going to head with this is that we need to make this a part of our regular routine, not just do it when we're in the heat of the moment.
Yes.
And that's what's going to increase that stress threshold, which will then allow us to have a larger capacity to handle the future stress when it comes.
That's exactly
is that what you're
right.
referring to?
Yeah. I mean, it's like no one is going to go run a marathon without training. And if you do, it's either going to end really bad or you're just an incredible human being, right? But you need to apply this in your life so that it's not in the moment. You can't just tap into gratitude, kindness, and mindfulness in the heat of the moment. Right, the physiologic portion that I mentioned that can help you as one tool, but it's the just changing your life perspective a little bit with a couple of these tactics. I think will help blunt that response down the road.
So I haven't really thought about it quite in this. I spent a lot of time thinking about these concepts, but really all of these things: resiliency, mindfulness, kindness, gratitude. It's stress threshold training.
Yes.
Is essentially what we're doing. I mean, just like you would lift weights to get stronger, you'd run to be able to run further. All of these things are like key ingredients for increasing your stress threshold long term.
That's exactly right.
Okay. And so you're saying we can work on this in multiple avenues. Number one, if you can decrease the stressors in your life by eliminating unnecessary things, excellent. Do that. Second, we're going to work on increasing our stress threshold. One, in the moment, trying to tame our physiologic response. When the heat is on, be simple, focus on breathing. And then at other times, think about this longer term approach.
Exactly.
Okay. Wonderful. And can you tell me, as somebody is trying to work towards this, what are some of the top tips that you would give them? Because this is a thing that's not easy. And nobody is going to all of a sudden flip a switch and become a stress management master, right? This is a journey. On the same token, nobody's ever going to get to the end of the road and say, I've completely mastered this. I never have to worry about it again, right? So this is going to be a process for people. What tips or pieces of advice would you give them as they're starting on that process?
I've mentioned it many times, but I think first thing is awareness that stress will impact your lives. Definitely. It's just a part of living. It's physiologic. So don't feel like there's something wrong with you because it is naturally hardwired, but you can utilize that by changing your physiology a little bit when you need to. I think some other things are that if you can then look into we mentioned it earlier in terms of your purpose, because if you have, let's say, 2 papers to write or you have these deliverables for work and you only have 3 hours, that 3 hours will be incredibly stressful. Now, if you were doing something that you're passionate about, you can probably work all night, even though it's not helpful for your sleep. But it's just an example of when I have to wake up to go to work, it's challenging. Right? If I have to wake up to get onto the river to go fishing, I'm up an hour before my alarm goes off.
Right.
And so it's just goes to show you that if the work that you're doing is in alignment with your purpose, that then gives you joy, that stressor will still be a stressor, but I think that's where it changes your slope a little bit. It may change your stress threshold or ceiling, but that stress is not as bad because it's a part of what brings you joy, right? So that's one thing. And then if you can tap into some of these other tactics to improve your mindfulness, your gratitude, your kindness, I think that will help just sustain you in life so that your stress resiliency gets optimized.
That's excellent. I do think there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding around those concepts of resiliency, mindfulness, kindness, gratitude, joy, optimism. So I would really encourage people to do a couple of things. One, learn more about them. We have dedicated episodes to all those that are already out or they're coming. So be looking for those. But also, don't think about this as just like a woo-woo exercise that you're just supposed to be doing because somebody told you to. Like, no, this is a part of your process for increasing your stress threshold and for becoming the better human that you want to do. Like, this is the training that you do for that. I think that mind shift may be helpful for people.
Yeah, I agree.
Excellent. So this has been an excellent discussion. As always, Peter, I really enjoyed talking with you about this, and I thoroughly enjoy it. So I'm going to take a minute kind of as we wrap up, and I'm going to summarize my my notes here. I've been jotting. First, I want to recap your definition of stress. It's the body's natural physiologic response to some sort of demand for change or external pressure. So stress in and of itself is normal and it's natural. So I think that's important for people to recognize that when you're in a stressful situation, you can pause and say, wait, this is normal. This is part of being a human. So don't judge yourself for being stressed. Starts out as a physiologic or a physical response that then ultimately can become an emotional response. It can be helpful, and there are some hallmarks of good stress. So it stimulates you, it motivates you, it will focus you, and can inspire you. Those are good signs. But when done excessively or for too long, it becomes chronic, and then bad stress can decrease your well-being, decrease your physical health, decrease sleep, ruin your joy, and then also decrease your performance overall. So some good ways to distinguish between good and bad stress. We talked about being intentional with your time. Unfortunately, we're not doing great at this. 80% of parents report being excessively stressed, and the other 20% are lying about it, in my opinion. 41% of people across the world say they're incredibly stressed. We talked about some of the most common stressors being finances, lack of autonomy, and depersonalization. And then I really love the approach that you gave to handling stress in the third section. So number one, be aware that it's normal. Number two, start by changing your physiology, typically with a deep breathing. Third, tie things to your purpose, meaning, and values. That's going to help you tolerate a lot more. And then view things like resiliency, mindfulness, kindness, and gratitude as part of your stress threshold training. Excellent. All right, so that's my summary. Now let me give you a chance to summarize here. You've answered our three big questions over the last 45 minutes, but here I'm going to give you a chance to go rapid fire on these, okay? So the first one, what exactly is stress and how does it show up in our lives?
So stress is your response to a stressor, and it really manifests in an imbalance of the stressor and your internal state, because you may be in a really good spot in your life where the stressors you can blunt the effects of it, or you may be in a very low period where that's more impactful to your stress, reaching your stress threshold. And it's physiologic. If anything, it's natural. There's nothing wrong with you.
Okay. And why do so many of us feel overwhelmed, and what are the consequences?
A lot of it we put on ourselves. We put on ourselves, either we take on too much and we take on things that are not in alignment with our purpose that bring us joy. And then we set up expectations for ourselves that are not achievable. Social media being one of those things, comparing to others for sure, which is part of social media, but then also not having a clear idea of what success is. Because success to one person maybe being the elite person in their work area or clinical expertise, or another person in the same, domain in the workforce may actually be just being a great father or a parent or a mother, and so just understanding that.
Good. And then our third big question, what are the practical steps we can take to reduce and control our stress levels?
Other than the acute stress response and how you can tap into physiology, I really think that you need to practice these different things that can boost your resiliency, which again are kindness, gratitude, mindfulness. If you can work on those and they become a fundamental part of your lives, with time, like any muscle, it'll grow, it'll get stronger. And then eventually all those stressors may not be really impactful to you. You'll just kind of let it brush off and you'll manage them. And then your stress threshold will get higher too.
I always like to end this thing with a challenge or a call to action, which is for myself and also for the audience. So we're going to try to help folks get the first big win in this situation. So this challenge is going to have two flavors. One is, I think if you find yourself in a stressful situation, in the heat of the moment, control something you can control, which I would say is breathing. So I want people to do that exercise. So the 5 or 6 deep breaths, just like you described in the third section. So that's our challenge. Next time that comes up, do that. Or if you know you're going into a challenging situation, so if you've got you're public speaking or you're going to have a difficult conversation or something, maybe do that right before that event and see if that can help you and you sort of head it off before you have that physiologic response. So that's our challenge that we want people to try, and I think that'll help them get the first win in this process. Excellent. So this has been a phenomenal session. It was titled How to Manage Your Stress, Name It, Control It, and Use It for Good. Dr. Peter Reed was our guest. Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
That was my pleasure. Thank you.
To our audience, remember to live intentionally, consistently better. Keep striving to be the best human you can be so you can give your gift back to the world and never stop optimizing. Thanks for listening to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project. If you like this episode, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps others find us. Know someone who might benefit? Share the episode with them to join us in our mission to help as many people as possible become the best humans they can be. Have feedback or a topic idea? Email us at optimize@mayo.edu. And be sure to look for us on Instagram, X, and YouTube.
This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be relied upon for medical, professional, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified professional for any questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity is for informational purposes only and does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.